Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am Ray Russell, and this week we continue our story back to the late 1980s in the Global Wrestling Alliance. And right now we're going to bring the man back onto the program to tell us a little bit more about that time in his life. Let's welcome back onto the show, the one and only Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thank you, Ray. And I should have warned you about this. And I really have to start out with an apology. Last week, when we ended the show, I somehow forgot to wish our listeners the best in health and wealth and wisdom. Somehow it just got away from me. I forgot to do it. So even though it's a week late, I wish all of you out there health, wealth, and wisdom. And why don't we do this in case I forget again? I say this to people all the time because I'm older. And it's not me so much, but a lot of times people say, have a good day. I'll say, we might not see each other again, especially talking on the phone with people that you might never talk to again. I say, well, since we probably won't ever, communicate again, I hope you have a good rest of your life. And
well, that can be taken there are a few different ways, but yeah.
Yeah. Most people are cordial about that.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, if it was somebody, if I'd been talking to Dick Slater 20 years ago, it might have been a little different tone when I said that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine so.
Have a good rest of your life. What's left of it.
Oh man. Well, we made a faux pas last week on the program, and we talked about it off air real quick, and you said Dr. Red gave you a little bit of a smack of the hand for it. You guys were talking before we went on the air last week about some of the talent that was there in the Global Wrestling Company. Right. One of them was a manager by the name of apparently Reverend Johnson. And you were referring to him as Reverend Jones last week. And I know it's a simple Johnson, Jones. It's all I get where the mistake would come from, especially after nearly 40 years. So no big deal in my world, but I know you love being accurate and being, you want to make sure you tell the story properly. So yeah, it was Reverend Johnson we were referring to in regards to that new African-American faction you were putting together there in the Global Wrestling Company. We've got a couple of angles I want to talk to you about this week too. Now, I don't know if you're going to recall them or a whole lot about them, but I just thought they were fun, and I just wanted to kind of mention them, and at least even in passing, just to kind of put them out there to give the listeners an idea of sports entertainment that you guys are trying to bring here. Because it seemed like you tried to do it in Knoxville. You guys tried to do it some in the ICW, and it comes back here again in Global. So the common denominator in all that is Bob Roop. And people look back and they go, but he's a fucking straight-laced Olympian. That was your gimmick for many a years, right? You were just the wrestler that went out there, the wrestling machine or whatever you want to call it. But behind the scenes, you understood that wrestling had evolved, and I won't even say completely evolved, because wrestling was always a show to some degree. You can go back to Gorgeous George, and even before him, there were, gimmicks and things of that nature, and they drew and they worked. So you always tried to implement that, and some territories kind of pushed back on that. But being here and being the booker in the late 80s, and with Vince McMahon taking off huge with sports entertainment by this point, I would imagine it was more welcomed by this group of guys.
Oh, yeah. We needed to do something, especially when you don't have guys that are named talents. None of these people. Now, the first few tapes have some names on them. I'm not sure exactly how they got there. They were made before I became employed there. But afterwards, we had Joe and Dean Malenko, and, both of them went on to, achieve a certain amount of, fame and notoriety or acclaim. Fame and acclaim might be better. And we had, of course, their father, Boris Malenko. So, I mean, and those three were great talents. Someone you mentioned a minute ago before we came on the air, Steve Collins.
Yes, the party animal.
The party animal. He was very good worker, very good hand. Nice looking. He did a good interview. He wasn't a Dusty Rhodes or anything, but he did a good interview. He was convincing. He did a deal where he always had a couple of pretty girls, one on each side when he was doing interviews, and
yes,
he looked in his real life, I didn't know him well enough. I never hung around with him. He lived somewhere in the Keys, I think, but he came from I think he came from a family that had a lot of property, and so he didn't need the money from wrestling. He liked the exposure, you
Gotcha.
know.
Yeah.
It's exciting to be you know, when you go on TV and people start recognizing you. Some people like, in fact, when I first got over and people started, I enjoyed it at first until people started following me in the bathrooms asking me for autographs. That's when it got a little bit, you know, onerous, a little bit negative. Yeah, we talked about that. If you want to become a public figure, you better be ready to ready to greet the public. You never know where they're going to show up. I'll give you an example. I don't know if I told this one before, but I was in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong's a city, I don't know, 11, 15 to whatever, million people. And I was in it had been the former emperor's palace. It had 800 rooms, and 5 or 6 stories were above ground, and 2 or 3, I think it was 3, were below ground. Now, the ones above ground, the first 2 stories above ground were commercials like stores and things, and then the top 3 floors were apartments, condo-type apartments. The bottom 3 floors were all like small shops. They were like they would be a bedroom size, and there were hundreds of them. There were 3 floors of them. I was looking for a tape deck, play tapes on for my music. I went down, I was on the bottom floor, so on 3 floors underground. I looked through about 9 or 10 different shops. I found one in a corner, and I walked in there, and I picked up a tape deck, and I walked over, and the guy that was sitting behind the desk that I was approaching was an Indian, from India. Before I could say anything, he said, "Bob Roop." I mean, I couldn't believe it. Imagine that. I mean, you're in a city
halfway across the world.
Millions and millions and millions of people. You know, how in the hell could this guy know who I am? Well, it was a simple explanation. The TV from Australia went into Hong Kong. So, in fact, Barnett, I was unfortunate that I never got to do one of the Hong Kong, Singapore, Macau type tours that they did. Yeah. I would have, you know, they go off for a couple of weeks and hit each one of those cities or do a show there. I would have loved to have been there for that because I love to travel. I went there on my own. So, I mean, I went to those places on my own.
Right.
So, but it would have been more fun with a wrestling company, especially to have someone like, imagine having George the Animal Steel to walk around with in those strange cities.
Would have definitely been interesting.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, that's my story about the cost or I don't want to say penalty, but the byproduct of being famous is that no matter where you go, it's if somebody knows you. So if you like privacy like I do now, that's horrible. But I'm glad now. I mean, the reunions that we go to, the Hall of Fame reunions, are basically the ones that I go to are always a lot of fun because you know, I know what to expect, and people remember you, you know, in your glory days. And when they're actually looking at you, they don't see you. They don't see me as I want to tell anybody the way my sons describe me, but, you know, they see this 82-year-old man. This 82-year-old man looks half crippled. But that's not what they see. When they're taking a picture next to me, they remember me the way I was. Right. And that's very nice. You know, that's very flattering. That's why I get accused of being too nice sometimes. They say, you know, you're so nice. You hang around and you know, you'll talk to fans even after everything's stopped, it's over, and people have gone home or whatever. But you know, the building's still open. You'll sit with a table of 6 or 7 people and talk to them for an hour or more. And I said, it's really nice of you. I said, well, yeah, I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm at least trying to be a nice guy. because I don't want to have anybody come and challenging me to do a match now. You know, I'm a little past getting in the ring stage. So
Certainly, my goodness.
anyway,
I would hope so. Some guys don't realize when the time is up, but I'm glad you did. Anyway.
my real motive was because the people that come to these wrestling shows and pay to be there,
Mm-hmm.
they're showing a lot of respect to everybody. And they don't come there just to see me, of course, but I am part of the show. So I want to let people know that I appreciate it. And plus, I like fans. They're talking about you in a positive way. It's the greatest thing in the world to have somebody shaking your hand and they've got both their hands wrapped around one of yours and they're pumping up and down and say, "Oh my God, I used to hate your guts. Oh, I hated you so bad." Anybody walking by would go, "What's wrong with this picture? He's acting like he wants to marry this guy. He's telling him how much he hated him." But they don't realize that's a compliment, in our business. I said, "Well, thank you." I said, "I guess I was doing my job right."
That's right.
I shouldn't say job. I said I was doing my duties, and most of them were jobs, so I guess it does fit. Yeah, and it's the same thing with us, with you and I, Ray. You have a real enterprise going with your website and all the things all the different interests you have. But if it wasn't for fans and people who were interested in that material,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't be able to be successful at it. The show wouldn't be possible. Our little corner wouldn't be possible without having our fans out there. So thank you out there again for listening to us and being with us.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better in regards to, thank God that people are interested in what we're talking about, the history of professional wrestling, really. Going back now, just talking about what really never took off and is more than just a local independent promotion in Florida, yet there's so much interest out there. We've got so much great feedback. People thought it was a great job from beginning to end, just kind of telling the story. Lots of things came out. That Gordon Solie story certainly shocked some people, surprised them. And they were like, well, wow, but that's business. And that's especially in the wrestling business. Boy, is that business. But any business, you're going to have things like that, occur. But everybody knowing the name Gordon Solie, that was a story that really stuck out in regards to when he was supposed to be shopping around the global promotion. He might have been doing some other things at these local TV companies and whatnot. But when you just mentioned, though, before we got off on that little tangent about everything else, I want to go back to that name because that name was not somebody I realized was a prominent figure in global until, thankfully, this week, Bob was kind enough to share almost a dozen of his episodes with me already and more to come. And I got to skim through them real quickly over the weekend. And one of the names in there was the party animal, Steve Collins. And like you said, he would come to the ring, had a little robe on, and he brought a couple of nice-looking ladies out there with him every week. I'm not sure where he found them, but I'll leave that there. And so... and then I start looking around and there are, all these characters and things you guys were trying to develop. And Collins had been in the Florida territories throughout most of the 1980s, even into the early 90s. He continued to wrestle and whatnot. So you said, you think he kind of came from a family where he didn't necessarily need professional wrestling, but he loved the business to some degree, even if it was just the exposure of getting over, if you will. But
Right.
But if you go back and look at his career, he spent most of it in and around Florida. So it seems like one of those guys that didn't really need to leave home. He just kind of did it when, in his free time, but he did it well, and that was a guy that you guys put on top there, and he had the gimmick,
Yeah.
he was the party animal.
Yeah.
He was the lover boy. He was all these, things rolled into one. And so that was kind of an interesting gimmick I enjoyed. Also, we talked about him last week a little bit. Soul Patrol. I was able to discover who they were beyond the Soul Man Alex G, who I believe was trained by Boris Malenko. You went and did a little digging yourself. Ram Man, Johnny Evans, kind of a big stout dude, and TJ Jackson made up the original 3 Soul Patrol members. So that was a kind of a unit, a babyface unit.
I think Ram Man had, I think Lola. I don't remember if we had a last name for her, but she was a beautiful girl. She was his slave girl or something like that. I don't think they were baby faces, so they wouldn't have called her a slave girl.
Right.
Of course not. Of course they wouldn't have called her that. She was his, I don't know, his attendant, let's say.
Yes.
And
I think I
know
know where you're going with that.
Well, Alex G was a nice looking guy, and
Yeah.
and in fact, all three of them had pleasant faces. They weren't like,
Death row.
Quasimodo. Yeah, they weren't like Quasimodo or anybody, or like I look now. But TJ had to weigh 320, and Man had to be 300.
Easy.
So Alex looked like a Alex. Alex always walked at one. He didn't ever walk in the middle. He was always on one side, because otherwise it would have made him look like a midget.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And Alex was another guy that seemed to be prominently figured in to some degree. Even though the Soul Patrol was a 3-man unit, he seemed to be the leader. And as a baby face, he wasn't really leading anything, but he would get I noticed he was used in public service announcements, kind of for the kids, and he had like little gimmicks where they would shoot the vignettes by a waterfall or something like that. So it seemed like there was more destined for Soul Man Alex G in the future if Global had continued on.
Well, he was more experienced, if I recall. He was more experienced than the other guys. They might have started. TJ and Ramman might have started almost from scratch. Maybe they had worked out, or they had practiced on their own, just found a ring. So you don't have. Well, Mick Foley showed us you don't need a ring. All you need is a garage and a mattress in your backyard.
Sometimes he didn't even need a mattress.
Yeah, well, Mick is a phenomenon.
Yes.
And a real success story in his business. And I'm proud. I don't know him very well, but I'm proud to know him to what degree I do. I do admire him tremendously, because another thing, he's a great writer, and I admire that about anybody. But he has a way of telling stories, his stories, and making them very enjoyable, very readable. I don't know. I don't remember if I told one about Terry Funk had a book about his life that was ghostwritten. And when I started to read it, Terry gave it to me, and said some nice things like to my friend Bob Roop and all that. Well, when I started reading it, the first couple pages were just absolutely, just interesting and well written as they could be. And then I turned the page and I started reading the first chapter, and it was completely different. And I turned back, I looked, and I didn't notice that the first foreword was written by Mick Foley.
Oh,
because he was buddies with he and Terry Funk really tight.
Yes,
they were really tight. They did a lot of stuff in Japan together. So yeah, the great writing was from Mick. Now Terry's book was fine, and I admired Terry Funk tremendously. But I had to stop reading his book. I actually went back later and finished it, but I had to stop reading his book because he put in there that Dick Slater beat the crap out of Bob Roop, and Bob Roop was tough, And I once I read that, oh, was I pissed off? Oh man, I was hot. And for years, I tried to look for some way to be with Terry so I could tell him face to face, and rather than just call him on the phone. So I could tell him face to face. I wish he would correct that, because, that book now in the digital age, that book forever. And the fact that, I admit it freely that Blackjack Mulligan floored me with a sucker punch. Well, who wouldn't? He might have been able to knock Andre down with a sucker punch, for all I know. You hit anybody on the jaw, and most of the time you'll knock them out. But fortunately, listen to that. This is really funny. Fortunately, Blackjack hit me in the eye, so he didn't knock me out. He just gave me a black eye that lasted about 3 months.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Yeah, Steve Collins didn't need the money, but he liked the notoriety of being a big man in a small town,
Right.
Because he was well known. The Global Show played in Miami, and it was seen into the Caribbean. So for those 30 episodes that we did play, Steve was on most of them, at least doing an interview or something. Or he's on a lot of them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
You only need to be in one, but he was in a few of them, and he made a good. He was in good shape. He looked good. He was tan. He was masculine. He had the hairy chest, and nice looking. He had blonde hair and well spoken, and he was a nice person too. He was honest, truthful, respectable. If he said something, you could count on it. I think he actually helped Kevin Sullivan buy a home in the Keys somewhere. I don't mean with a loan, but by getting them something. Maybe it had been one of their own properties. Mm-hmm. They had been renting that they were thinking about selling. His family, they had rental properties all over the place. Maybe they gave it to Kevin at, I don't know, half price or something, because I heard he got a real deal. But that's the kind of guy he was, Steve. He was a good guy. He was a good man.
No, that's good. Now you're killing his character here. He was a heel for those of you who are scratching their heads. Yeah, Steve Collins was around the business for quite a while, but I did notice that he kind of floated around Florida more often than not. So it seemed like He was a guy that, like you said, kind of a big fish in a small pond sort of deal. It's like, hey, I just want people around here to know me, so when I go out, I can have a great time or something along those lines. And I mean, I don't know the guy myself, but I can kind of see where you would get that, especially with the gimmick he was given there of the party animal. So it kind of works out for him. I was looking through the talent just on the episodes you sent me. Some of the earlier episodes, we talked about some of the big names that were floating around the company early on, including Adrian Street, Bugsy McGraw. Now, those guys were there for Street was there for a few tapings. Bugsy, I think only one taping, best I could tell anyway. But those were Florida guys. They were Florida natives at that point. They were living in Florida. Adrian did until he passed away, and I believe Bugsy still does today or somewhere around that neighborhood. So it kind of makes sense to bring the local big-name talent in who aren't really getting work anywhere else at that point. Adrian Street was a hell of a gimmick. We've talked about Adrian in the past, kind of trying to sell you some Amway and things of that nature,
right?
Which was a funny story in itself. But another name that I noticed from the past that some people might recognize, especially down there in Florida, because I know he moved down there to Florida and he never really left, was Raul Mata. That was kind of surprising. I didn't realize he had worked for the global company. Now, he was just kind of there for you and a hell of a hand. And he had been a huge deal on the West Coast once upon a time. But the story goes that I've heard is he found a lovely young lady and they moved to Florida, or she was from Florida, or however the story goes. And he was just content on being sort of that mid-card deal in the Florida territory because he was happy with his family, so to speak. And it was fun to see Mata even popping up here in the late 1980s.
Right. Yeah. And with people like Raul, in fact, a few times I had people out when I was out in Texas years earlier who thought that we looked alike. And I didn't see that, but that was fine because he was a very nice looking guy. But with him and like Bugsy or anybody else, the problem that we had was that we weren't running shows yet. So we didn't have the money to pay them except out of our primary budget.
Right.
Which we had, that's all we had, was what we had left in our bank account to get started. I told a story last week, he's talking about Samoans and them wanting, I don't know, thousands of dollars a piece to do a show. We couldn't afford to pay guys, so guys like Raul and Bugsy, there was no way they could stick around because they couldn't afford to. They needed work.
Sure.
And we weren't providing matches. That's why we eventually ended up, after the first few tapes, had some celebrities on it. Corporal Kirshner, we promoted him to Colonel, I think.
Right.
And
probably a good idea with Vince McMahon's attorneys waiting in the wing, so that's probably a good call.
Yeah, copyright infringement. You're right. Yes. So and we had some guys, but again, we couldn't pay them a weekly, guarantee.
Right.
That was just impossible. And we couldn't get them work. So, of course, there's no way guys could stick around. Steve happened to live there in Florida. He could drive to the TV studio and, cost him very little money. And, of course, TJ and Man and Soul Man were all lived in Miami. And then we started using guys from, now we had Rusty Brooks. He lived there. The Malenkos, I'm not sure where they lived. It might be Tampa. I know Larry Simon, Boris, lived in Tampa. And so maybe Jody and Dean, although I don't think they were still living at home by that stage. I'm not sure where they lived, but Jody, I believe, lives in Tampa now. Anyway, we had them, and, they were good talents, both of them good workers. The only thing about them was size. They both were fit and looked great. And Joe especially was they were both nice looking. But Joe was like movie star handsome. He was cosmetically very attractive looking guy and, kept himself in good shape. And one of the guys that I admired, he worked out with Karl Gotch for a number of years. And the fact that he did that gave me more respect for him than I had for about the 10 guys in the business I respected the most, because I told you my experiences with Karl Gotch. There were two of them. Each of them lasted about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I was in and out because all Karl wanted to do was show me he could break my shoulder if I let him, which I decided I didn't want to do that. So I went ahead and said, well, thanks for the lesson. I think that's enough for today. I'll see you next time. Now, I don't know, Eddie Graham could have guaranteed me $5,000. I wouldn't have gone back for another one of those, because the third time it was going to have to be a shoot, and we were going to have to sit on our feet, and somebody was going to get hurt. And even if it wasn't critically hurt, I was going to get hurt too, because, you don't mess with somebody like Karl Gotch. I might be able to take him down, but in fact, all those old shooters, very few of them could take anybody down. So what they would do is they'd lay down on the mat. They would lay on the mat, and what they would have is have the sucker, the mark, or whoever, the guy that's going to get stretched, give up or quit or get his arm broken or whatever. What they did, the way they convinced those guys to go ahead and try, one of the ones they did, they had a shooter come through there while they were talking to this prospect, and the shooter was dressed up in janitor clothes and was pushing a broom. So they said, well, look, we'll give you somebody to work out with, want you to show us what you can do. And the guy said, well, I think it was, might have been a guy named Al Green. I think told him to get in the ring. I said, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have our janitor get in the ring and lay down, get in there and just show us what you can do. Got him laid down on the ring, got him laid down on his stomach. Well, he was a hooker. And as soon as this poor sucker, I hate to say Mark, but this poor sucker, as soon as he touched him, Al, got a wrist lock or something, and then he didn't break him into 20 pieces. They weren't breaking bones back then, but he probably made him give up about 15 different times. And then before Eddie and whoever else was watching had enough sadism to make their day, and then they let the poor sucker go. Well, that was the way they used to do things. My deal was, look, we're going to shoot. We're going to start our feet. You're going to have. I'm not going to let you get down where I have to touch you, so that you're now in the position for you to put a hold on me. No, we'll sit on our feet and see how we do. And I never wanted to do that. I said, well, Karl Gotch, you'd have to be out of your mind. I never wanted to do that, but I thought if I ever was forced to deal with him again, that's what I forced again. I was going to suggest, let's sit on our feet and see how we do. I was going to take him down if I could, and I think I could. I was going to take him down, and before he could grab me in some filthy arm breaking, leg breaking, or one that did both at the same time, before he could grab me in one of those hooks, I was going to let go and say, well, you know what? Thanks for the workout, Karl. I've had all I need to know. I'll see you later, and I'll be out the door.
Karl didn't earn the nickname God of Wrestling from those in Japan for nothing. He didn't give that to himself. I mean, he could hurt you.
When he trained those guys over there, he would have them do 600 squats a day and 200 or 300 push-ups. Well, you know how he encouraged them? He did them at the same time.
Insane.
He did the 600 squats.
Yeah.
And say, squat with me. I'm going to start, you squat. And he'd do 600, and they'd have to try to keep up with him.
Right.
And then at push-ups, he would do all that stuff because he had been doing it his whole life. He was trained to do it. Mm-hmm. And he was fantastically in terms of calisthenics.
Sounds like, well conditioned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, he had the respect because he could do this stuff himself. I told you about how Larry Simon, Boris and I got over just with the Japanese wrestling promotion, just by them seeing us running on the street and then conditioning ourselves. We gained a lot of respect from them. But they put me in a 45-minute match on TV with Inoki. That's engendering some serious respect because I wasn't a big name. I wasn't a big name in the United States or over there either. So for them to put me in for a 45-minute match on TV with Inoki was something special. Mm-hmm. But it came from that respect of seeing us working out, they knew that we were serious about our profession.
Right. And they took the it was a sport over there. And I know, the debate is, oh, well, a lot of people thought wrestling was a work or it was real or this, maybe a hybrid of both here in the States. But in Japan, they took it very seriously as a competition, as a sport.
Oh, yeah.
So seeing guys that are in that type of shape and working out and conditioning themselves, I could see where the respect would come from through that over there in Japan. And then, like you said, a 45-minute match with Inoki, I mean, that had to be, a hell of a match, no doubt about it.
Right. Well, it was good. I've got it. Maybe we can use it somewhere down the line. But we talked about Medusa in the reference to Japanese. The female wrestler who, after she did a tour there, she stayed over there and trained doing the Muay Thai and martial arts stuff. They hired her. They gave her a 3-year contract. That's an example of how they respected people who were, athletic, who trained and who showed pride in their physical ability. They respected the hell out of that. So Karl was like a god over there because, he was probably in his 50s, maybe 60s, and still doing 600-700 squats every day. Pretty extraordinary.
So Karl trained a lot of talent, and I can't even begin to name all of them over there in Japan, but he would come over to the States too and kind of help out Boris at times, or at least something along those lines, because a lot of guys that were trained by Boris also have credits being trained by Karl Gotch, I've noticed, like a Sean Waltman, who went on to become the 1-2-3 Kid and X-Pac and the WWF and things of that nature later on. Now, he was trained down there in Florida, from the Florida territory, trained by the Malenkos and whatnot. I don't know if you remember him or know who he is or encountered him in this time, because he would have been about 16 years old, but I believe he broke in right around that time as well. But there's a lot of names that Boris helped train during this time period that would go on, maybe not at this point because they'd only been trained a year or two, maybe completely a rookie here in the global territory. But I'm looking at some of these guys, and they would go on to become bigger names in the business. Of course, the Malenkos have been around already a while, Joe and Dean. They're going to go have much success in Japan, like right after this. And then eventually Dean's going to go on to have a hell of a run in WCW as a U.S. heavyweight champion, the cruiserweight champion. Even Vince is going to pick him up. He's going to be an agent for the WWE for many, many years. And I know he winds up getting released somewhere around the COVID era or something like that. And I believe, last I checked, I think he's an agent for AEW now. So Malenko Dean, has been around working in the business all these years. And then other guys that would go on to, I'm looking at the name, Norman Smiley, who would work in Japan, work in Mexico. He had a good run with WCW near the end of that company's time on top. Norman, I believe, has been a trainer down for the WWE and NXT for the last good 20 years, I think. So Norman's still, employed by the, helping out. And he got his start down here in Florida. So he's been a Florida native for a long time. Guy by the name of David Heath, who you guys used as basically enhancement talent at this point, and he looked the part. But he would go on many years later to become Gangrel, a vampire character in the WWE. So there's a lot of guys here that just getting started, but it's fun to see, the early inception. Do you have any memories of Gangrel or Norman Smiley, any of those guys?
And especially Norman. He looked great. He had a great body and very handsome guy. He was tall. He was 6'2" or so, and he looked great. He just couldn't get a break. He couldn't get a break in this country for some reason. So he started going to Mexico. And he came back with some stories about some of the places he had to work. He said one place they worked, the bathrooms had flooded, and there was feces and urine all over the floor. They had to stand on benches in order just to get dressed because they had to, they couldn't go out and dress in front of the audience. So, he had some real horror stories, but, I found out more recently that, he made a tremendous career down there, where he became a very big name, and he had a place that he could depend on for some income every year. It's kind of like Stan Hansen in Japan. Mexico was like that for Norman Smiley. But, also he was a good guy. He had character. He was fun to be around. He was great talent. Do anything he asked. He He could do a lot of things. Never took advantage. He was good to have in the dressing room. He was he was like a really, if all the boys in the business had been like him, it would have been a much, much more pleasant business to be in.
Wow, that's high compliments.
You could trust him too. And that's one of the things that's missing in pro wrestling.
Which is probably why he's had a job for the last however many years with the WWE.
Yeah. Well, he's more than capable. I'm happy for him. I don't wish ill on anyone, but there's a lot of people I don't think of to wish them anything, rather than letting people in my head that are negatives. I just don't think about it. But he's one that I can think about with a good feeling, and it gives me, like I might not smile on my face, but I'm smiling inside when I think about certain people. Mm-hmm. I'm fortunate to have a number of true friends. Now Norman and I we are friends. We're old but gold, but I haven't seen him in like 40 years or so.
Right.
But if I saw him today, I would have the same feeling. It wouldn't be like we were two strangers, like, hardly know. We would know each other and remember each other, what past history we had, and then we'd move on to where we are today. And he would be one that I would cross the street to see. A lot of people, don't get me wrong, I'm nobody I'm talking about is going to be upset about what I'm going to say. But there's a lot of guys out there that I would cross the street if I saw them coming on the same side of the street I was. Gotcha. I would cross the street.
Understood.
I hate to say, hey, how you doing to anybody when I really don't mean it. I feel like a hypocrite. I don't even want to nod at them, and I don't want to ignore them either, because that's an obvious sign that they actually affect you. If you know. They know that you know them and you're ignoring them.
Don't sell it, Bob. That's the deal.
Yeah, that's exactly. Don't sell it. Exactly. Those are great words.
My wife hates when I don't sell things, but she doesn't understand.
Oh yeah, the ladies don't like it much. When they make their moves, you're supposed to respond. Yeah. Yeah,
it's a different world outside of that wrestling business, I guess, right?
Yeah. Everything a wife does is supposed to get over with you, regardless of what it is.
Positive or negative, absolutely. You got that right.
Absolutely. If you didn't clean that toilet well enough, well, hey, you better go back in there, give it another scrub.
Well, oh man, we were talking about, I don't want to use this word because somebody out there's going to go, really, you kind of oversold it, but I don't want to say you revolutionized things, but for a indie company, kind of up and coming, you guys were really thinking outside the box. And I wanted to go back to that too. I was talking about that a little earlier with you and some of the ideas you came up with. We talked a little bit about them last week. The Fight Line deal, I got to see one of those. Gordon Sully hosting, that was fun. Boris Malenko kind of dressed up like a reporter almost in that story. That was a fun deal. And at the matches, I saw a few of those as well. You and Dr. Red kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, the old Siskel and Ebert deal. For those of you who don't know who Siskel and Ebert are, you're probably not listening to this show anyway. But if you don't, go Google them, and they rated the old movies and things of that nature. But so I thought, really clever stuff. But then you get into some of the storylines, and here comes the old box is trotted back out. I saw even Lord Norman Smiley pulled out of a box on one of the episodes because according to Jim Cornette, anything that comes out of the box is automatically over. Well, it's debatable, but I love that the box was used again here, even in the late 1980s. But there was another angle that somebody wrote about online when I was doing a little digging. Somebody recalled an angle from back in this time period. And one of the videos you sent me happened to have that angle on it. And I said, get the hell out of here, because I didn't think it was something I was ever going to see. And so I'm going to read you what and I'm sorry, I don't even have the person's name. I think I got it off of Reddit or something, but this is their memory of the storyline. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You talked about Corporal Kirshner coming in, who had a little run there replacing Sergeant Slaughter in the WWF. It didn't really get over like the Sarge, but there's only one Sergeant Slaughter. But Kirshner, here he becomes the Colonel, and he does feud with the Iron Sheik. Sheiky Baby comes in. They have at least one match there on one of the videos that I have. But there's more to the story because you're going to bring in a secondary character of G.I. Joe Pilardi, and he's going to be kind of a partner here of Kirshner's. So before I set the stage for this storyline, do you have any background on Joe Pilardi?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay. I'm not super familiar with him either.
We were dealing with a bunch of people who, very few names because, we couldn't afford to pay them. And Red was very good at creating. Red was at least co-booker because a booker, books matches. But the only thing we were booking was TV because we were running very few shows. He and I would talk about different things, and he's the one that came up with Fight Line and at the matches.
Okay.
Just a
you
really
can tell,
great.
Dr. Red, I'm sure he's listening out there. He was enjoying himself, in those little skits and segments and things, and I loved it, man. There's a guy that I could have done so much more in the business. I know he had a shoot job that certainly paid the bills and things of that nature, but I really wish we could have got Dr. Red on a larger scale, even if, working for Turner or the WWF or something. He could have had a nice little talk show segment or something.
Well, you and I talked in past episodes about interviews being more important, a.k.a. Dusty Rhodes. Interviews being more important than the actual Hulk Hogan, than the actual work in the ring. Now, Red's work in the ring was good. I mean, he could do a lot. He could do just about everything.
Yeah.
But his interviews were great, and if he'd been given like national or international exposure, I'll tell you, he could have gotten over at a level maybe like Roddy Piper. Piper had that great interview. One of the best ever. But Red's would have been different. His would have been from a more of a psychological reference to psychological things of him having this inner knowledge about people. But he would have been able to as a heel especially, would have been really able to piss people off by just saying, look, every one of you out there, well, no matter, you should be cheering me because I can look at you and I can tell what kind of person you are. If I don't like you, I might mention you on my next interview. That guy's sitting in row 3 in the yellow shirt. Anyway, with his interview skills, he could have gone far. But like you say, he was a certified PHS, not PhD, because in psychology, I'm not sure what the S stands for, whether it's science. He had like a doctor's degree, and last week I said psychiatrist, and I apologize, and now I forgot again what the other one is. The
psychologist.
Psychologist. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, maybe the memory. I'm sitting here right now looking at your website, Wrestling Memory Grenade, and I'm thinking memory. Yeah, memory. My memory. Well, my memory still works well enough, but Red could have gone far. His interviews would have been completely different and he would have made it that way. I'll give you an example. We did the company we work with. I talked about last week. We had 14 companies. 3 of them were owned by the major players that hired us, and they were enriching their 3 companies by draining the assets of the other 11 companies. And if any of the 11 were successful and kept making money, well, they kept draining them. Until they didn't anymore, then they started another way. Or maybe once they made enough money, maybe they might have moved their act to California or someplace, and done the same thing. But we had a board meeting where all the presidents of the companies, this is a typical like you see in a movie, long, shiny table, like 20 chairs around it, one at each end. All the presidents of companies were all in there with 3 or 4 of the major players of the people who hired us. I was in there as the president of the academy. Red was in there as the president of Global Wrestling Alliance. Well, he got up and you were supposed to talk about how your company was doing. He got up and made a speech, and I'm sitting next to him. I had to fight the urge to actually turn and look up at him when he's talking, because what he said about our company sounded so unbelievably wonderful that, I mean, how things were going, and, and he used all these words that are just, business type words, that I told you last week about how he fired this one woman we'd been trying to get us to help get booked in the Caribbean. She wasn't able to succeed, so we had to let her go. And she walked out. She walked out of his office smiling. I didn't ask him what he said to her, but anyway, he had a gift of linguistics. He could talk. Still can. And I saw him testifying on. Maybe he doesn't want me to mention this, but he's one of the leading forensic psychologists in the state of Florida, not the country. I've seen his testimony on tape, and it's very effective. He's excellent. But with his interview skills, he could have gone to the top, because as we mentioned before, you didn't have to be tremendously great in the ring to be a big star. There were a lot of guys. You could draw money. It didn't matter how you drew it. I mean, not murdering people, of course, but it didn't matter how you drew it. If you drew money, you could get booked. You could get booked on top, and they would find somebody. Well, like we did with Lex Luger. Luger started working on top right away because we needed, in Florida when we hired him, we had him a couple preliminary matches, but I needed a wrestling heel. And so we put him on top. I managed him. I booked him with people like Barry Windham. And between Barry on one side, the referee, maybe somebody like Stu Schwartz, who would also be like a coach in the ring,
Right.
Someone like, and myself in the corner, we were able to make Luger look accountable. He didn't expose the match.
You were masking his greenness, so to speak.
Yes.
Having so many guys working. Barry Windham can, I've heard it say with Ric Flair, but Barry Windham could wrestle a broom, right? So you have a competent referee, not just a competent referee, one of the best of all time, and they're kind of helping out, kind of giving Lex some instructions, stay on him, things of that nature, hook the leg, maybe something like that, and then of course he's got you on the outside, kind of coaching. Literally, you're his coach, his manager is his coach in this instance. So I can kind of see where that would be helpful, and you could do that. You could plug somebody like a Dr. Red in with these guys, and that's what were perfect for him, was because he was as good as he was on a small scale here in Florida, but all these guys were green. They were just coming into the business. A lot of guys when they first break in, not the greatest promo in the world, so it really worked out that he could, and he worked with like a Death Row as well, because you don't really want those guys cutting their own promos. They're just two big badasses, right? So
right.
So he was. Fits in well here. So the reason I kind of morphed into Dr. Red in the discussion is he's part of this angle I was kind of mentioning with Colonel Kirshner. Kirshner was teaming at the time, like I said, on again, off again, with a guy by the name of G.I. Joe Pilardi. And Joe Pilardi, you can actually find results with his name in it going back to the mid-'70s. So he had been around the business, but never really made it, per se. He winds up here teaming at this time with Kirshner, and they're kind of feuding with Dr. Red Roberts. And Roberts is managing a guy at this point by the name of VC Min. And from what I gather, VC Min was, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but online it states that he was the son-in-law of Karl Gotch. Do you know that to be true or not?
No, I'm sorry. I never heard that one.
Okay, like I said, I found it online. So it just kind of seemed odd to me. But
wow. Yeah, because he was, did you see the VC in person?
I saw him on the tapes. I have seen him, yes.
Yeah, well, you see how small he was, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah, I could just see Karl walking his daughter down the aisle to a guy about a foot shorter than him. Anyway, but no, he was fine. I mean, we were, the Vietnam War was still fresh in people's memory, and BC men, Viet Cong, and with a Asian name. We just looking any way we could to draw heat, have heat just with the names. But yeah, he he was decent. He was.
What was really
again,
weird about him, he had just been in the business maybe a year or two at this point, and
right.
he was already in his mid-40s here when I did some information on him. And he looked at it, and he didn't just look like in his mid-40s. He kind of looked maybe even a little older than that to me. I said, it's kind of an odd thing. So when I did a little digging, I couldn't really find a whole lot on him, and it just seems like he pops up here out of the blue. And again, beginning wrestling in his mid-40s, very unusual, but he does get a little bit of a push here. And of course, manager is Dr. Red. And like you said, the gimmick of now somewhere around this time, Stampede Wrestling up there in Canada was doing the Viet Cong Express or something like that. And you guys got VC Min down here, who is from Vietnam, is the character. I don't know if he's actually from there or not. He is of Asian descent. You can clearly see that. But there's an angle, and I'm going to go back to, like I said, somebody online made a statement about an angle that they recalled from the Global Wrestling Company. And again, like I said, one of the videos you've already sent me has this angle on it. Now, I just skimmed it. I didn't have time to go back and watch it, but I said, oh my God, this is that angle. And this is the way the fan remembers it. And I'm just going to give everybody an idea of talking about thinking outside the box for the time period. And also, in the back of my head, I had little thoughts of going back in the 70s and your feud with Steve Kern and how personal you made that. So This is what the reader, or excuse me, the fan online wrote. He said, the interesting angle between G.I. Joe Pilardi and Corporal Kirchner versus Dr. Red Roberts and VC Min. Min came out with a photo of American soldiers in body bags being carried home from Vietnam, which caused Kirchner and Pilardi to freak out. Dr. Red Roberts, whose gimmick is based on his real-life job as a psychologist, diagnosed Kirchner as having what he calls here in the writing patriophobia, and invoked the Baker Act to get Kirchner involuntarily committed to an institution for evaluation. The guy writes in closing, what a crazy fucking angle. And so as I read that, I had not seen the tapes yet, mind you. And I said, wow, that's fucking very elaborate and interesting. And then you send me the videos, and sure enough, one of the ones I get already involves this angle. I just skimmed it. I didn't get to hear all the verbiage, but I clearly saw Corporal Kirchner coming to the ring, preparing to wrestle, and then a doctor coming out with some sort of a note, basically forcing Corporal Kirchner to be institutionalized or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So I said, wow, that is deep, man. And Dr. Red using his psychologist, background and things of that nature to be able to pull that off. So, wow, that's something else.
Let's put it this way. I never, ever saw Kirchner in person.
Okay.
So this is probably before I got hired. I don't remember what show it was, but what might have been happening there was that Red knew that Kirchner wasn't going to be able to stick around. I don't know if did you see him on any feature tapes?
Again, I only have the ones you shared so far, so I can't comment if he's going to be back or not after that. I don't know. I'm curious to see how the story unfolds if he does in fact return. That's a hell of a way to write somebody out, whether they're returning or not.
Well, that's just where I was going. Maybe if we knew that, he had said, look, I'm sorry I can't stick around because unless you can pay me, I think they got for TV, they might have got $25 or something like that. That was a way to get rid of them and get some heat on Red, by Baker acting where all of a sudden he's gone and you never see him again on our show. That would have been a great way to, Red is so smart that he figured that as a way that rather than just say, well, we'll just have him go out there and do a job and then he's just never seen again. He used it to get some heat on himself. To me, it's a tremendous amount of heat if somebody was really into it. If we could have followed up on that.
Well, we're talking hypothetical in there because we don't know if Kirchner returns or not, but that is a hell of a way to put heat on yourself while losing a talent at the same time. If that is in fact, what happened there. So that's a great call, man. That's some seriously good booking. But even if he is to return, that's just an interesting storyline in general. You don't see that in professional. You see a lot of angles in pro wrestling. And again, going back to your feud with Steve Kern, kind of incorporating the wars and things of that nature into your guys', it was very deep and very personal with Steve's dad. This is a little different in that regard. But at the same time, it's going back and kind of using, it's almost like Kirchner has PTSD before they called it that anyway.
Right, right.
That's I just thought, man, that's some super clever, interesting, definitely unique style of booking there. Thinking outside the box is just what global wrestling seemed to be. You know, it's like, let's just, and I hate to use this analogy, but let's throw shit against the wall and see what sticks. And I don't mean to call any of this shit. I just mean, let's try a little bit of everything. You know what I mean? And see what works and what doesn't.
Well, that's where we were. We were limited with name talent, and the guys that we did have, we knew we weren't going to have long because, again, we couldn't pay them.
Well, you can't give them a guarantee because there's no matches going on outside of the tapings at the moment, and you can't give them even a piece of the house because there's no house to pay them on either. So I can totally see where you're coming from. Like, yeah, we can spring and bring these guys in for the TV tapings and kind of lure the fans in for the future by saying, wow, this guy's here or that guy worked here, so it must be, whatever. But I totally get where you're coming from. These guys can't just sit there and wait for you guys to do another TV taping in 4 weeks. So they're trying to, pay the bills and things of that nature. I know Kirchner was floating around trying to get work anywhere at this point. He's going to eventually have some success over in Japan after this under a hood doing like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre gimmick as Leatherface. But I know Billy Jack Haynes, even here in 1988, tries to run against Don Owen up in Portland. And I know Kirchner winds up working up there for that little brief cup of coffee too. So it's just another, I see these guys floating around trying to keep steady pay to some degree because at this point, there's just Vern's really not even much of an option here by 1988. I mean, he's kind of starting to slowly dwindle down, right? He can't just hire everybody off the streets. So it's really just the WWF or WCW. Most of the territories are gone, and you guys are trying to revive the Florida territory era anyway.
Right. It was a rough go because I talked last week with Gordon Soley's story about us going up to Channel 44 in Tampa and St. Pete, talking to the program director there, and him having two of McMahon's 2 hours of his TV on his station every week. I don't know if Florida Championship Wrestling was closed by that time or not. I wasn't watching. But anyway, we had limited resources. We knew, like I say, they originally raised $800,000, and they had spent about half of it by the time I came on. $150,000 for 2 shows was just unbelievable waste of money. But with that, and it'd been in business a year or so with salaries and all that. So we were down to like less than $500,000, which is not much in the wrestling business. If you're not bringing in any money, it's not much at all. I mean, especially you got to pay salaries. You got to pay rent on your buildings. You have to, pay Gordon Soley for do TV.
Sure.
So, every television we did cost us, 10 for the building, 4 for Gordon. Had to cost us at least $20,000.
Okay.
So,
but you guys went out when you came in and redid the TV, the way everything was set up. You guys were doing 4 episodes at a time, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And that made it. Now it detracted from the quality of shows 3 and 4. They're still good. I mean, they're still fine. But again, going way back to where we were talking about Kirchner. Kirchner was like a star because he was known for being on
WWF
with
TV.
McMahon.
Right.
Yeah, and Bugsy was fairly well known. He'd been around a long time in different promotions. They're in Florida too. But in order to keep anybody with any, Raul Mata didn't come to work for us full time because we couldn't pay him, So we had to. What we had to do was we had to build our own talent. Red was one of them. If I had had any sense, I would have put the tights back on. But I was burned out in terms of being, in the ring. What if? That hindsight's always 20/20. Red and I were talking the other day about some of the things we could have, should have done. But again, hindsight's always 20/20. But yeah, I could have put the tights on, and as an experienced heel, I could have added something to where maybe we could have even, tried to do some local shows, but didn't think about it at the time. And the 400,000, again, the integrated business, our head company or the parent company, assured us that there was going to be more money. They were going to do a second offering of stock. We asked questions about it, like how successful we expect it to be. Oh, we expect it to be do just as well, at least as well as the first one. Well, people who had purchased stock in that first $800,000, there had been no dividends paid to them because there wasn't any income coming in. I'm not sure what their stock ever got, or how high it ever went. Hopefully it went up a little bit. So if they sold it, at least they got their money back. If you got a company that's not making any money, there's no way to pay dividends to stockholders. When you go back and you try to do a reissue, like, oh, we're gonna put out more stock. Well, if the stock that's already out there is not making any money, why would anybody want to buy new stock? Mm. So we should have known, but neither Red or I were stockbrokers or knew the market that well.
Right.
We thought these were the guys that were the ones raising the money and doing all these financial transactions. So we thought that we were marks. We believed them. There was a great line in some movies like, you screwed up, you believed me. Yeah, we believed that there was money coming for the future. And so we acted on that basis. And it wasn't until we got near the end. In fact, they might have even tried to do something. But if they did it, it was half-assed because they didn't if they raised any money, they kept it probably. Even when we were down to like half the money they originally raised, they were still taking out $10,000 a month for the so-called expenses of a publicity company and something else. I don't know. They weren't really doing anything. They weren't actually doing anything for us. They were just like, that was a retainer to keep them involved with us. Of 3,000 a year, 35. I think there were two that were 3,500 and one was for 3,000. So they basically around $10,000 a month. It doesn't take long for, plus Red and I, between us were making, over 100,000 a year. So it doesn't take long. You got $400,000 left. You're looking at, if nothing changes, you're looking at 2 years. And the other factor is that the people who integrated business didn't care. They had all kinds of other companies that they could start and raise penny stock for and do the same thing they had done with us. And the other thing that I swear, just a second thought of, Red and I were very difficult to deal with because we didn't kowtow at all. We didn't call anybody sir or mister. We weren't insulting, but we were appropriate. But we weren't in awe of anybody. We weren't just because this guy's the president of the company. I don't care. What does that have to do with our business? He's not making us any money. I'll be appropriate with him. I know I never called him sir. In fact, he took us somewhere at one time where we had to walk. He was walking ahead of us because he was, of course, the big cheese, and so he was walking ahead of me. This guy had no ass. He had no buttocks. From his back down to the back of his knees was flat. He had no ass whatsoever. Red and I still laugh about that because, Red says, you know what? Bobby said, I didn't learn this in my studies, but just in kind of common sense, I don't trust a guy with no ass.
Well, that's...
And he was completely correct in that because we couldn't trust a guy. They might have told us that they issued, they did a second offering of stock. They might have told us that because they never showed us any evidence. They never said, hey, go check the New York Stock Exchange news or whatever, or even locally. They never showed us any kind of documentation that had done anything. I think their object was just to, eat up the company.
Well, it's like you said, this is a penny stock company or whatever you want to call the actual corporation here in regards to they create a various group of businesses that are very different. From a Ginsu knife over here to a professional wrestling company over there. The ones that work, they put their money behind, they do whatever they got to do with it, and they continue to flourish. The ones that aren't working, I'm sure, that's a dime a dozen. That comes and goes with them all the time. So they just continue to move on. And so you guys are kind of like in the middle right now, right? Is at this point?
Right. Now, if they had not been bleeding all those companies would have had a lot more chance for success, all of them.
Gotcha.
But, I mean, think about it. There's 11 companies, and you're taking like an average of 10 grand from every one of them every month. $110,000.
Pulling a little Jim Barnett there.
$1,050,000 a year you're talking about. That's some serious money. And plus it made the stock in the companies that they owned. Those companies were showing a tremendous profit, and their stock went up and up and up. Maybe that was the whole plan, was to bleed these companies dry, get their stock, say their stock started out at $5, get their stock up around 100, 150 bucks. All of them got 300,000 or 400,000 shares of it. And then in a way that doesn't flood the market and cause it to drop, discreetly sell off their stock over a period of a year or two, become multimillionaires, and then retire.
Well, they're in the business of making money at the end of the day. So I guess if they figured that out and nobody else was the wiser, I guess more power to them, I suppose, at the end of the day. But unfortunately, that didn't really help out the Global Wrestling Company.
No.
That's an interesting story, though, kind of how you guys are treated and how things work behind the scenes, business-wise. I'm sure a lot of people are into the business scene, but I'm going to take you back to the wrestling side of things here for the wrestling fans that have come to the program this week. If that's okay
Sorry,
with
folks.
you. You're fine.
Sorry, folks.
It's interesting stuff, no doubt about it. I mean, to kind of get an idea of what was going on behind the scenes. We talked about how much they spent making 2 episodes of TV versus, you coming in going, well, we could save a crap ton of money if we do it this way. And you're recording 4 episodes at a time. And I know that can be tedious on the talent as you guys keep going back out there for another set of taping after taping in one lump sum. But, we see a few other announcers come in and after Gordon. I'm assuming that's when they are here on the shows. But
yes.
Including yourself, so you even did some commentary here. But, go back to the talent just for a moment. And we talked about a lot of it. And the reason I'm trying to introduce some of the talent, some of the angles and things is down the line, if, you so choose to release all of this footage, people kind of have an idea of what they're walking into. But also at the same time, in the future, we're kind of discussing us going back and covering some of this stuff and having some fun with it and the good and maybe the bad. Maybe we could have a few laughs as well along the way, but maybe looking at a few angles or matches and things like that as we go on here in future weeks on the Wrestling Stoop. But there was another angle I noticed. Manager at one point in the territory or in the promotion was Ox Baker. And he had managed the team of Rusty Brooks and Jumbo Beretta, but he was publicly fired at one point. And this may be because Ox was leaving the territory as well. I don't really know the reasoning, but it seems like if that is the case, again, we go back to that really intelligent way of booking. It's not just Ox disappears, we forget about him, and they've replaced him. We utilize Ox on TV, arguing with them, and they wind up firing him there publicly on the television program for not getting the job done or whatever the case may be. But again, another angle here that goes on in the Global Wrestling promotion is the firing of Ox Baker as a manager, and I'm referring to, again, Rusty Brooks and Jumbo Beretta, who were the tag team, and them replacing him with, and I can't remember because I was just skimming the videos, but I guess it probably would have been Dr. Red or someone along those lines, because I believe Boris Malenko is managing his sons. But it's just another angle I noticed when I was just kind of skimming through there. So it was always a wise move, I think, that a lot of wrestling companies never utilized, was get the talent over even on the way out. So like you said, maybe that's what was happening with Kirshner getting Dr. Red over, but here it's getting Rusty Brooks and Beretta more heat because Ox Baker was fine, but he's not good enough. Now we move on to so-and-so here. And again, I apologize. I don't remember who it was that took over off the top of my head, but again, they play it out on TV, and I love that, that you guys did that sort of booking.
Well, yeah, Ox was between bookings. I think he had something coming up, but he had a month or so that he wasn't booked. So he and I were close friends, and we loved to play cribbage. And he was so much fun. I used to follow him around. I mean, I looked like a stooge because I wanted to watch him. I mean, he was so funny in public, just walking around. He could walk up to a counter and especially with women, and he would just be looking at them. He had a smile on his face, and he had that eyebrows that went out to about 2 inches on both sides, and a mustache that did the same.
Right.
And just a really, really weird looking character, but he had this gleam and he had a nice smile. He had a gleam, a friendly look in his face, a gleam in his eye. He could do a simple thing like go up and buy a candy bar and go up to the counter and lay it down and just be staring at I remember 2 or 3 times young female women would look at him and he'd just be smiling at them. He wouldn't say anything. He would just be smiling at them, and they would blush and actually grab their mouth to keep from laughing or what, because I don't know if it was at him or with him or whatever, but he was so interesting to follow around. When he came to Florida, he stayed with me at my place. I had room for him, and my wife Molly really liked him too. And he used to walk we had a pet Dalmatian. He used to walk the dog in our neighborhood, and our neighborhood was they were like mobile, like most of them are double wide, 24 feet wide, and at least 45 feet long. And there was, I don't know, 500 or 600 of them. It was a great big complex. You had to in order to even be able to rent or buy one of the places, you had to get a check with the FBI to get through there. They were very careful about who they let. Well, Ox would stay with us, and he would walk the dog. His toenails were painted red. He wore a pair of shorts. He was hairy as he could be. He looked like a Yeti. And he'd be walking our dog around the neighborhood in bare feet and on a leash. And I used to love it because he'd walk down a block. There would be a street with mobile homes on both sides. And they say the street would be like a block long. He would walk down the block and turn the corner and then walk down the block on the other side, coming back. Well, I used to go out just to watch him. And there would be ladies in our neighborhood who would get together for, I don't know, gossip sessions or just to schmooze or whatever, who would be out on their lawn, on their front lawn, sunbathing. And every one of them, when they saw Ox coming, every one of them got up and went inside their trailer. But the other good thing that really stuck out was I got a knock on the door a couple times. I opened the door and there's a little kid there, 5, 6 years old, saying, "Can Ox come out and play?" I swear, I'm not making that up.
From just what I can gather when I see him out of his character on things, he was like a giant kid at heart. Was Ox to be an Ox, to be a guy that size with the what I always called the devil eyebrows, because they kind of look like the horns of the devil and things like that. He was a scary looking dude when I was a kid, and got to see him a little bit as just kind of a manager and things of that nature when he would float around. But he had a charm to him. I see what you're going with there. Even recently, I watched something. WCW had a Legends reunion pay-per-view in '93, and in between the matches, they would let a couple of the Legends cut promos and things, and they wind up having the Crusher and Ox Baker up there together at one point. And Ox is cutting a promo, but then he lets the Crusher cut a promo, and Ox just starts waving to the fans, just out of character, and he comes back and he goes, "You know something, Crusher? I just realized you're prettier looking than me." So it was just Ox being Ox. He was just out there to have fun. He had nothing to prove at that point, so he's just having a good time.
Oh, he was, and he was. He was fun to be around. He had more. It was very, very hard to put him down and keep him put down. He always had a rebuttal for just about everything. I told you the one about the woman whose son had a foul mouth when she wasn't around. Her son said every cuss word in the book, and she was down there when Ox and I were at the pool. My wife Molly was the lifeguard, and Ox and I were playing cribbage by the pool. He said something, I don't know, SOB or something, and this woman came over and said, "Sir, my young son is here, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't use that kind of language." And I said, well, where's your son? And he looked over, and it's this kid, and he's smirking at us because he knows we've heard him say MF and the C word and everything else. I mean, I almost jumped on him a couple of times because of the way he talked, where my wife could hear him. But Ox was stuck. This kid had this little angelic look on his face, and so I'm thinking, I'm beaming at it. I'm actually grinning at him because I'm thinking, at last, somebody's got you where you don't have any rebuttal.
Right.
You don't have any way out of it. And he went, he thought for a second or two, and he said, when you're at the pool, you're supposed to have a pass that shows that it's like a wristband that shows it's okay for you to be there. Because you'd have people that would drive by and just come in and swim in the pool that didn't even live there. So you had to have the pass. And Ox was looking at her, and he looked down, he says, where's your pass? Well, I left in my, I can't talk to anybody that doesn't have a pass. You have to go away. oh man.
Well,
yeah, he never had to apologize, boy. Yeah, he was a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun to be around. Having him as a guest in your home was like, you hired a comedian to come live with you. Somebody who's funny just by being himself. Oh, I know what I wanted to say.
Sure.
He got a name attached as a killer because Ray Gunkel.
Right.
It was Gunkel, wasn't it?
Yeah, Ray Gunkel, and I believe before that, Alberto Torres, too. Two different guys passed away after the wrestling Ox and taking the heart punch.
Yeah, well, Gunkel apparently had eaten 4 hot dogs or something, or a pizza or something before he went out to the ring that night. He had a heart attack after the match, and of course they used it. I might be wrong. It might have been in the ring. I don't know.
No, it was backstage. From my understanding, Ray had come backstage. He was just sitting around talking with the boys, laughing, and winds up having the heart attack. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, here he got one of the nicest guys in the world, but he's forced to be a heel because, he killed a couple guys with a heart punch. It was great for him. You remember the movie Escape from New York, right?
Sure.
Yeah, remember him in that?
Yeah.
Do you remember Ox being in that?
Yeah, and I like to hurt people as well. So Ox had a couple of Hollywood stints, I guess you could call it there. He appeared in a couple of different movies. Yeah. But, that's what really got him over was those, it happened, within about 14-month span, I believe. He was in a tag team match up there working for Vern, I think it was, or maybe in Nebraska. I don't really remember exactly off the top of my head, but I know he winds up giving the heart punch to Alberto Torres in 1971, and he winds up, having a heart attack. He had some heart issues, so that was really part of the issue, and I think he had something rupture inside of him. But so he passes away, and they tell the story, well, Ox Baker's heart punch killed Alberto Torres, and what are the odds that Ox wrestles Ray Gunkel the very night that he has a heart attack and dies as well, just over a year later? So that really made Ox's career, and he lived off of it. He walked around saying, I killed 2 people. I killed 2 men with my heart punch. He didn't have a problem doing that if it got him some bookings. So,
of course, but it's you talk about something that's so unusual that a guy that is that nice wouldn't hurt a fly who's thought of as a killer. Yeah, Ox was good to have around. I wish it would have been great to be able to have all those guys, all the guys that we talked about so they stay down there and work on global tapes. But our financial situation. Now, for our fans out there, you didn't get to hear a whole lot about global today. And part of it, in fact, all of it's my fault. Ray actually knows more about those global tapes than I do. I didn't even take a look at the tapes that I sent you. So I haven't seen those tapes in, I don't know, 30, 40 years or so. So I don't remember everything that's on them. But what I'm going to do, I promise, especially by the time that we release them, I'm going to be conversant. You know how I talked to you before I wanted to mail you, how I wanted to look at the tapes first.
Sure.
It was for that reason. So I'd be familiar with them. But in order to get started on where we were today, you needed some material. That's why I sent it to you. And thank you. Thank you again for the way you presented it. But by next week and the week after, however long, we can talk about global for a long time, I think. There's a lot of interesting stuff still to talk about. But I will be more conversant with what's on those tapes and about the people who are on them. Any lack of that today, please attribute to me and my lack of preparation for today's episode. Well, I promise to do better next.
We've got some names we can still hit on too. Of course, I talked to you offline about a couple of the guys we'll be, kind of mentioning and seeing if you have any memories or thoughts on. Bob Cook, obviously, we were talking about him before we went on the air. Jumbo Beretta, we talked about his partner, Rusty Brooks, so we'll talk a little bit about Jumbo here. I wanted to discuss him with you just a little. Lou Perez, who was actually the real-life cousin of Al Perez, who was a professional wrestler out of Florida as well. Lou Perez comes through here, so there's a lot of names that I kind of encountered as I skimmed through, but I was also going to pick your brain about a few other questions I had just about the company in general. So we've definitely got more to talk about in regards to global wrestling. And again, the plans are to eventually kind of go back and watch a few of these things together and with the fans out there to kind of watch along with us. And we'll take some of it seriously, and maybe some of it we won't take so seriously, but that's what the fans love, having fun. And that's, that's the plan moving forward.
I want to tell you about an interesting coincidence. I was looking for some I was looking for the name Global Wrestling Alliance. It turns out there was 3 or 4 of them after the one we had, but there was some tape, and it was one of the people on the tape was Joe Pilardi, and I watched him work, and I remembered him, but I thought it was interesting that you mentioned. I never did get to know the guy very well because Red and I worked in an office. And the wrestlers who were being trained, unless we went into the training area, which wasn't far, it was just down a hallway, but unless we went in there, they didn't come back in our office. The wrestlers that came in our office would be people who came in the front door and were met by the receptionist, which was my wife, Molly. And if they'd made an appointment, or if she would call us and say, there's someone here, and give the names who would like to see you, can we send them back? And that's the way that people looking for jobs would come in. Otherwise, we wouldn't see them. Unless we went in the back where the wrestling was, we wouldn't see the wrestlers. So we didn't get to, I didn't get a chance to get to know them very well because, we were back there training. What are you going to do, interrupt the training and interview a guy? But I got to know them through, over time and experience of dealing with them and making those tapes. But I thought that was an interesting coincidence. You brought up Joe Pilardi, and I had just seen a tape of him. But more good stuff to go.
Yeah, we've got plenty to go into. And I know in regards to what you're talking about and dealing with the wrestlers and whatnot, there were a lot of segments that involved you working with the wrestlers, kind of produced vignettes or segments and things of that nature, whether you act as an interviewer or you were part of I don't want to say you were part of the storyline, but you were involved in kind of getting it over on air or whatever. So we're going to definitely look into some of the things that you were doing specifically down there, including your time there with the old Siskel and Ebert type deal there with Dr. Red. Very unique for the time. We're going to look at your guys' opinions and how they hold today. But there's a lot still to get into, no doubt about it, about global wrestling and a whole lot more in the weeks to come. But right now, guys, we are going to wrap it up this week. We have been 3 weeks in a row, so next week we are going to take off, and I didn't plan it this way, but boy, does it work out perfectly because my kids go back to school next week, and that is the most chaotic week of the year for me every year. So we're going to take the week off next week, Bob, but we'll be back in the following week, and we'll continue on here into the later half of the summer of 2025.
Well, thank you, Ray. And again, for those of you out there listening, you talk about my personal theme song should be The Long and Winding Road. because I can't seem to stay on a straight path. Ray is very laboriously lined up for me. I got to wander off at least 4 or 5 times. Well, that's an old man's habit, and please forgive me for it. And not for being old. It's better than being dead, of course, but for sometimes you purists out there who only want to hear wrestling, you have all my admiration in the world, but unfortunately you're stuck with me. And wrestling was just part of my life. I've done a lot of other things too. So, but again, thank you for listening. Whatever your motive, love us, hate us, tolerate us, adore us. And if you really love us, you can always send us some money. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you out there for listening. Please, everybody, stay well. And Ray, I thank you again, my friend.